What would you do if you saw a ghost that no one else could see? Would you run away, or would you stay and try to understand it? I often asked myself this question, but I never thought I would face the answer in my own life. My name is Mary. I was 24 years old when this story began. I lived in London and I worked in a small law office. The work was not always exciting, but it paid for my little flat and food. I liked reading books in the evenings, and I dreamed of one day having my own family. Before I continue to my journey to Hollowbrook Manor, I want to ask you to subscribe, share, and leave a comment. It will help me to tell more stories like this one for you. Now let's continue. One cold November morning, my boss, Mr. Harris, called me into his office. He was a thin man with gray hair and sharp eyes. Mary, he said, I need you to travel to the coast. An old woman, Mrs. Whitmore, has died. She lived in Hollowbrook Manor. I was her lawyer. We must look at her papers. You will go to her funeral, and then you will go through her house. Bring back anything important. I was surprised. I had never done such work before. Alone, I asked. Yes, Mr. Harris said. I'm too busy here. You are young and strong. You will manage. I did not feel strong, but I did not want to refuse him, so I agreed. The next morning, I packed my small bag and took a train from King's Cross Station. The weather was gray and damp. Thick fog covered the streets of London. I sat by the window of the train, and soon the city disappeared. The train moved faster and faster through the dark countryside. At a small station in the north, I changed to another train. This one was old and slow. A big man with a red face sat down across from me. He looked at the brown envelope in my lap. On it was written, Mrs. Alice Whitmore, Hollowbrook Manor. The man raised his eyebrows. You go to that place? He asked. Yes. I said, I am from a law office. I must attend the funeral. The man leaned back. Then you will be the only one there, he said. His voice was low. I tried to smile. Why do you say that? I asked. Because no one in our village will go near Hollowbrook. He replied, it is not safe. Remember my words. His eyes were dark and he said no more. I felt a shiver and turned to look out of the window. By evening I reached the little town near the sea. It was called Dryford. The wind was cold and the air smelled of salt. The big man from the train introduced himself as Mr. Carter. He gave me his card. If you need help, come to me, he said. Then he left me at the inn called the Swan. I ate supper, went to my small room, and fell asleep quickly. That night I dreamed of waves crashing on rocks and a woman calling out for someone. The next morning, the sun was bright, though the air was still sharp. I dressed in my black suit for the funeral. Mr. Carter was waiting for me downstairs. Together we walked through the square. People stopped talking as we passed. They looked at us but did not smile. I felt like a stranger in a strange land. The church was old and stood beside a graveyard. Inside it was dark and very cold. There were only 3 of us there. Mr. Carter, the priest, and me. Poor Mrs. Whitmore, I thought. No friends, no family. The service was short. I bowed my head in respect. Then, as I lifted my eyes, I froze. At the back of the church, a woman was standing. She was dressed in black clothes that looked very old. A wide black bonnet covered her head, but I saw her face. It was white and thin, like a sick person. Her eyes were dark and her mouth was tight, as if she carried deep pain. I stared, but no one else seemed to see her. When we left the church, I looked back. She was gone. Mr. Carter, I whispered. Who was that woman in black? He stopped walking and looked at me with surprise. What woman? He asked. There at the back of the church. She looked very ill. His face became pale. I saw no woman, he said. His voice shook a little. I wanted to ask again, but he hurried me out into the graveyard. We walked in silence, but my mind was loud with questions. Later that day, I went with a driver and pony across the causeway to Hollowbrook Manor. The path was called Old Tides Crossing. The driver told me we had only 2 hours before the sea came in and covered the road. Then the house would be an island cut off from the land. I held the key to the house in my pocket. My hand shook when I touched it. At last we reached the manor. It was a tall gray house standing alone on a rise of land. Behind it stretched wide marshes, flat and empty. In front of it was the estuary, shining under the weak sun. The house looked beautiful, but lonely. It had many windows, but all of them were dark. The driver turned his pony and left quickly. I was alone. I stood for a moment with the key in my hand. The silence was heavy. A seabird flew by, crying out. Then the sound faded. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. The air inside was cold and damp. Old pictures hung on the walls. Dust lay thick on the furniture. It felt like no one had lived here for a very long time. I went from room to room. Each one was dark with heavy curtains and heavy chairs. In the kitchen, I saw an old kettle. In the study, I found piles of papers. This was my task, to sort through them. But I felt no desire to begin. Instead, I pulled back a curtain and looked out of the window. From there, I could see the marshes, the estuary, and the little graveyard behind the house. The sun was setting. The water turned red with the light, and then I saw her. The woman in black. She stood beside gravestone, very still. Her face was pale as snow, and her eyes were fixed on me. I could not move. I could not breathe. Her eyes were full of hate, sharp and cold. I felt frozen, as if her gaze held me there. Then she stepped behind the stone and was gone. My legs shook, my heart raced. I wanted to leave the house, to run back across the causeway, but the tide was already rising. The tide had cut me off. The road was gone under the sea. I could not leave Hollowbrook Manor. I was trapped inside the lonely house. The windows were dark. The air was heavy and cold. I told myself to be calm. I was here only to look at papers. Nothing more. But the memory of the woman in black stayed with me. Her pale face, her dark eyes, The hate in them, I could not forget it. I lit a small lamp in the hallway. Its yellow glow gave little light. Shadows filled the corners of the room. I went to the study, sat at the big desk, and began to look at the piles of papers. Most were old letters, bills, and notes. They were not important. Still, I sorted them slowly. I wanted to keep busy. I wanted to push away my fear, but the silence was too strong. The house did not feel empty. It felt alive, as if it watched me. I stood up and listened. Nothing. Then I heard it, a faint sound. A low creak from above my head. My heart beat fast. I looked at the ceiling. The sound came again, slow, heavy, like a chair moving back and forth, a rocking chair. I froze. The house was empty, yet someone was rocking. Above me, I wanted to leave the room, but I forced myself to stay. "It is the wind," I whispered. "Only the wind." I sat back at the desk, though my hands shook. I tried to read another letter, but the words blurred. I could not focus. Then, just as suddenly, the sound stopped. The silence returned deeper than before. I felt relief, but also fear. Silence seemed to wait for me. At last, I could not bear it. I left the study and walked back to the hallway. My footsteps echoed on the floor. I climbed the stairs slowly, holding the lamp. Each step felt heavy. The upper hall was colder than below. Dust lay thick on the carpet. Doors lined the passage. All were closed. At the far end, one door was locked. I tried it, but it would not open. I turned away quickly, afraid to stay near it. That night, I lay in a small bedroom. The bed was old, but I was too tired to care. I put the lamp on the table beside me. The wind rose outside. It whistled across the marsh. The house creaked with every gust. I pulled the blanket tight around me. At last, my eyes closed. I woke in the night to another sound. This time it was not the wind. It was sharper, closer. Knock, knock, knock. My eyes opened wide. The sound came from the passage. I sat up, holding my breath. Knock, 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 knock. These slow knocks again and again. I wanted to call out, but my voice would not come. I was frozen in fear. The knocking stopped. Silence. I sat still, waiting, but nothing came. After a long time, I fell into a troubled sleep. In the morning, weak sunlight touched the windows. The causeway was dry again. I packed my bag and locked the house behind me. The air outside was sharp and clear. A seabird cried overhead. The sound felt almost kind after the silence of the house. I walked quickly across the causeway to the village. I did not look back at the manor. I was afraid of what I might see. At the inn, the Swan, I ate breakfast. The innkeeper, a round man with sad eyes, asked how my work was going. I wanted to tell him about the sounds, the woman, the locked door, but when I looked at his face, I stopped. He did not want to hear. He already knew something. "The house is very lonely," I said instead. He nodded slowly. "Yes, very lonely." After breakfast, I walked through the square. People watched me as I passed. Some turned away, others stared, but no one smiled. I began to feel heavy in my heart. Why did they look at me this way? At last, I saw Mr. Carter near the church. I went to him. "Mr. Carter," I said. I saw her again. Woman in black. She stood by the graves. Behind the manor, his face grew pale. He gripped his hat tightly. "Do not speak of her," he said in a low voice. "You must leave that place." "But I must finish my work," I answered. "I must go back." His eyes filled with fear. "Then take care," he whispered, "and pray you do not see her again." But I did see her again. That afternoon, I went back to Hollow Brook with the driver. The tide was low. The road was clear. The driver left me at the house and turned away quickly. I was alone again. Inside, I opened the study desk and began to work. The house was cold, but I was calmer now. I told myself I was foolish to be afraid. Papers could not harm me. Shadows could not harm me. Hours passed. The light outside began to fade. I put more coal on the fire and lit 2 lamps. Then I heard another sound, a soft cry far away yet clear. A child's cry. It came from the marsh. I stood at the window. The mist was moving in from the sea. It spread across the ground like a white sheet. The cry came again, thin and sharp, a cry of fear. My hands shook. I pressed my face to the glass. The marsh was empty. No child was there. Still the cry echoed in my ears. I pulled the curtains closed. Later that evening, I returned to the upper passage. I felt drawn to the locked door. I pressed my ear against it. For a long moment I heard nothing. Then came a sound, slow, hollow. Bump, bump, bump. My blood ran cold. The sound of wood striking the floor, a rocking chair. I stepped back quickly, my lamp shaking in my hand. I wanted to run, but my feet would not move. The sound went on, steady and calm, rocking back and forth. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. When I opened them, the sound had stopped. The passage was silent again. I hurried back downstairs. I lit every lamp I could find. I wanted the light. I wanted to chase away the shadows. I sat by the fire, but I could not rest. The woman's face filled my mind. The child's cry echoed in my ears. The locked door waited above me, holding its secret. When I returned to the inn the next morning, I found Mr. Carter waiting for me. His face was serious. "You heard her," he said softly. I stared at him. "Her? Who is she?" he sighed. "Long ago there was a governess. Her name was Eleanor. She had a baby boy. But the family did not let her keep him. The boy died in the marsh when a cart sank in the mud. Eleanor never forgave anyone. They say her ghost still walks near Hollow Brook. And when she is seen, a child dies soon after." His words chilled me. I wanted to deny them, but I could not. I had seen her twice. What did that mean? That night I lay awake in my bed at the inn. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. I thought of Eleanor, the governess who lost her child. I thought of her pale face and her dark eyes. I thought of the cry on the marsh, the cry that would never end. And I knew that I would have to go back to Hollowbrook Manor. I had to know the truth. I had to face her again. I returned to Hollowbrook Manor the next morning. The sky was gray and the air was sharp. A thin mist already lay on the marsh. I carried food, a lamp, and matches. I told myself that this time I would be brave. I would finish the work. I would face whatever waited for me. Inside the house, the air was damp. The silence pressed on me like a weight. I lit 2 lamps and carried them from room to room. I opened desks and cupboards. They were full of old papers, some yellow with age. Most were useless, but I worked carefully. I wanted to keep my mind busy. If I stopped, I would think of her, the woman in black. Eleanor. By afternoon, the mist had thickened. Outside, I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back. The causeway was already hidden under water. I could not leave even if I wanted to. I was trapped again. I tried to calm myself. The innkeeper had given me a blanket and food. I could sleep here for one night. But I knew that she was near. I felt it in the heavy silence. That evening, I climbed the stairs with my lamp. My eyes were fixed on the locked door at the end of the passage. I felt pulled toward it. My heart beat fast. I held the key in my hand. The driver had given it to me that morning. "You may need this," he had said. I had not asked why. Now I understood. It was the key to the locked room. My hand shook as I pushed it into the lock. For a moment I could not turn it. At last I forced it round. The lock clicked. The door opened slowly with a long creak. Cold air rushed out. I raised my lamp and stepped inside. It was a child's room. A small bed stood in the corner. A wooden rocking chair faced the fireplace. Toys lay neatly on the shelves. Soldiers, books, and a small boat. Clothes were folded in the cupboard. Everything looked ready for a boy who had left only yesterday. But the dust told the truth. No one had lived here for many years. I stepped closer. The chair began to move, slowly back and forth. Creak, creak. My lamp shook. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stand still. The chair rocked on, though no one sat in it. I whispered, "Eleanor." At once the chair stopped. The silence was heavy. Then a sound broke it, a cry. A child's cry, thin and sharp. It came from outside across the marsh. The same cry I had heard before. My blood ran cold. I rushed to the window. Mist covered the ground, but I could hear the cry again. More desperate, more lost. I pressed my hand to the glass. The cry echoed through the house. The rocking chair began to move again. Faster now. I dropped the lamp. It hit the floor and went out. The room was dark. Only the sound of the chair and the cry filled the air. I fled from the room, pulled the door shut and locked it behind me. My hands shook so much that I dropped the key. I ran down the stairs and into the hall. I lit another lamp with trembling fingers. The house seemed to breathe around me. I wanted only to leave, but the tide held. Me prisoner, I would have to wait until morning. I sat by the fire with my blanket wrapped around me, my eyes stared into the flames. At last, near dawn, I fell into a restless sleep. When I woke, the fire was out, the tide had gone, the causeway was clear again. I did not wait. I gathered the papers I had taken from the study, locked the door, and hurried across the marsh. My steps were fast. I did not look back. I swore I would never return to Hollowbrook Manor. I stayed at the inn for 2 more days. I sent the papers to Mr. Harris in London. Then I returned home. The city noise felt strange after the silence of the marsh. But I was glad of it. I wanted to forget Hollowbrook. I wanted to forget Alina. I told myself I had imagined it all. Yet, at night, I woke from dreams of her pale face and the cry of her child. Months passed, then a year. I married, and soon I had a son. My life felt warm again. My husband was kind. My boy was full of laughter. Sometimes when he smiled at me, I thought of the lost child in the marsh. I prayed that Alina's ghost was gone. But in my heart I was not sure. One Sunday, we went to the park in London. The sun was bright. Children played on the green grass. Music played from a band. My husband held our boy's hand. A man was giving rides in a small cart with a pony. My son cried out with joy. He wanted a ride. My husband laughed and lifted him onto the seat. We will go together, he said. You wait here, Mary. I smiled and waved as they rode off behind the trees. Then I saw her. She stood by a large tree at the edge of the park. Alina, the woman in black. Her face was pale, her eyes dark with hate. She looked straight at me. I could not move. I could not call out. I watched as the cart came back into view. My husband was smiling. My son was laughing. The cart passed near the tree where she stood. The pony gave a wild cry. It reared and turned. The cart struck the tree and overturned. I ran, screaming my son's name. People rushed to help, but it was too late. My little boy lay still on the grass. His face was white. He was gone. My husband was alive, but his body was broken. He never walked again. I held my son in my arms and wept. I looked up. The woman in black was gone. Only the tree stood there in the sun. That was the end of my peace. The ghost of Alina had followed me far from Hollowbrook. She had taken what I loved most. I knew then that she would never rest. Her hate was too deep, and I knew that I would never forget her pale face, her dark eyes, and the terrible cry of her child. For the ghost of Hollowbrook Manor had taken my life, though I still lived.